Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world around us, especially when it comes to what's happening in Israel and Palestine. As Christians, we probably have some questions. We have a question like, what do we do about this? Which side is right? Which side is wrong? And how do we respond? How do we pray for? What does this mean? Are the end times here? All those are valid questions and great questions that we should ask. And so in no way am I an expert on everything Israeli-Palestinian. After doing some research and looking at different things, I've got a little bit of a grasp of it, and maybe it'll help some of us to understand where this conflict is coming from and how we can respond. And I really think a lot of this begins back in Genesis. Genesis 25, where Isaac's wife is going to have twins, and she notices there's a struggle there, and she goes and in somehow, some way, has this conversation with God, and God responds this way. He says, and the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples will come from you and be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. And as we know the rest of the story, Esau is the older one, born first. He is the one who is supposed to get the inheritance, but he trades it away for some food. Jacob takes advantage of him, lies to his own father, and ends up getting the inheritance. And so a conflict begins. And I think not that these are exactly how it works, but in many ways, you got kind of Israel is Jacob, and you've got the Palestinians who are Esau, kind of, in a little way. But that's really not the full part of it. That's just, for us as a Western culture, it kind of gives us a little bit of an idea of the conflict that's happening. You have 2 people that believe that this land, that this area is rightfully theirs. And so there's conflict. Today, Israel actually refers to the land given to the Jews. This is the land that God had given to the descendants of Jacob. Over the centuries, the ownership or rule of that land has changed at different times. There have been many times when the Jews were exiled, but there's always been a remnant of Jews in the land of Israel during those different times. And by the time we get to the New Testament, Rome is the one who is overseeing all of what's happening in Israel. And from about 66 AD to 70 AD, there's this revolt of the Jews against the rule of Rome. And so Rome decides to minimize the power of the Jews by removing their land from Jewish connection, and they change the name of it to Syria, Palestine. And so that's where we kind of fast forward to today, of that the word Palestine kind of falling into the idea of what that region is called. Obviously, it's called Israel today, but that's some of the conflict, where some of that conflict even begins. So Palestine is actually, the word Palestine is actually found in the Bible a couple different times. It's found in Joel and in Exodus 15 and Isaiah. But the root word, the better word, the better translation for that word Palestine is Philistia. And so that sounds very similar to the Philistines, right? You remember the Philistines, they were this group of people that were an enemy of Israel, especially during the Old Testament times. They inhabited the southwest coast of Canaan. And so there's no proof today that the Palestinians are descendants of the Philistines. You got to understand that that the Jews are the descendants of Isaac, and the Arabs are the descendants of Ishmael. And so when it comes down to this whole idea of Palestine versus Israel, Palestine is mainly Arabic, and Israel is mainly Jewish. There's never really been a country named Palestine. In fact, it's really a Latin word that was brought about around the 1st century. Palestinians have always been used to refer to non-Jewish inhabitants of that southern coast region, right? So from 1920 to 1948, there was this weird moment that went on where Jewish people that were living in Israel were known as Jewish Palestinians. And the Arabs that were living in that region were called Arab Palestinians. Then we have World War II breakout. And of course, then Israel gets Jewish statehood in 1948. And when that happens, there's about 700,000 Palestinian Arabs who become homeless. And none of the surrounding Arab regions want to take them in, except for one, Jordan. Jordan was willing to take them in, but Jordan was highly anti-Israel at the time. And so as they took them in, they began educating them and turning Palestinians into these terroristic groups. And so we've heard a lot about the group called Hamas. Hamas are not good people. They are considered by Arabic groups and by most of the even the terroristic groups, highly intense terrorists. They are violent. They will disregard their own people, their own kids, their own children for the sake of the cause of wiping out Israel. Their goal is to wipe out anybody who is not Muslim or who is not fall under Hamas rule. And so over the years, the Palestinians have been given many opportunities to become their own nation. But because there's this swell of terroristic kind of belief system that has been ingrained into some of the Palestinian people, they will only agree to become their own nation if Israel ceases to exist. There is no compromise in that for them. And so really there's kind of like this division area where there's the Palestinians, and for the most part, they're probably pretty decent people. A lot of, they really do try to get along with the Jewish people and just want to coexist. But then there's another faction of it that is ruled by Hamas. And that's the ones that we're hearing about more and more in what's going on. And so as this conflict has continued since 1948, Israel agreed to give the Palestinians a region, that southwest coastal area, right? That's called Gaza, or the Gaza Strip. And so it really kind of creates this tension, because Hamas, what they have done is they have dug underneath all of the buildings, and they use all of their civilians and all of the innocent people that really don't want anything to do with the conflict. They use them as bodyguards for what they're doing. They hide all their ammunitions. They do all of their planning. Most of their leadership and their headquarters are really kind of behind and underneath all of these civilian locations. And so in order for Israel to take care of Hamas, they would have to possibly hurt people that are civilians that they don't want to hurt, that they don't want to injure. And so it really creates this conflict. And so what we hear sometimes is that there's all these innocent people being injured and killed, and that's awful and it's terrible. It really shouldn't be that way. But you got to understand how terrorist organizations think. They have no problem with that. In fact, they think it makes them look more justified by sacrificing their own civilians that they should be caring for, that they really don't. Their jihad, their ultimate goal of wiping everybody out is the goal, and they'll do it by any means necessary. They're not going to follow any specific rules. And so it really does create this conflict where Israel sometimes looks like the bad guy, and sometimes they are. But you got to understand they're dealing with a very, very evil group of people, very evil. And so as Christians, how should we respond? Well, first of all, let's just start with this. We know that Jesus died for everyone, regardless of who they are, regardless of their heritage, who they were descendants of, any of that. And so Jesus died for Jacob's descendants just as much as he did for Ishmael's descendants, or Isaac's descendants as much as Ishmael's descendants. He died for Jacob's descendants just as much as he did for Esau's descendants. And so however we want to categorize all that, he died for the Jews, he died for the Gentiles, he died for everyone. And so we got to keep that in mind, that everyone is loved by God. The other question that kind of comes up is this the end times? Well, I'll be honest. Yes, it's always been the end times. It's always getting closer to the end of time. And so for us, we got to understand that no one knows the day or the hour. It can happen at any minute. It can happen any time. Some of these things could be the birthing pains of what's to come. And so we always need to be ready, and we are called to go and make disciples. And so situations like this should stir in us a stronger desire to share the gospel with as many people as we can. We have every relationship we have is on purpose, for a purpose. It's to share the gospel. God has given us those relationships on purpose. And finally, I would just encourage you as a Christian, pray a lot before you post something online. Don't pick a side. Be very careful with how you try to care about people when it comes to what you post. Not because you're in danger, but because we don't know the whole story. We are called to love everyone. And our hearts go out to those who are going through this, who are innocent people, who are in the middle of this conflict being used as human shields. Our hearts go out to Israel, who has tried to live in peace, but they have had enemies at all times trying to destroy them. Our hearts go out to the individuals who are having to make really tough decisions, and we need to be praying for them. And so I just encourage you, before you post anything, pray a lot. Pray before you post. It's the wisest thing to do. All in all, continue to be praying for what's going on, and thank you for giving me this time.